gentlemen, I want to welcome everybody. It's nice to see a full house like this. I don't know that we've had one in quite a while, but obviously this subject is something that appeals to many residents' interests, and I think you're going to hear remarks that make it worth your while to have made the journey tonight down here. I'm Roger Lee, the chairman of the Spotlight on Seattle Committee, and this is our third program so far this year, and we're fortunate through the work of George and Diane Loschky to have a speaker from LMN Architects, which was Mr. Loschky's well, he's the L. And I wanted to give you a little preview of the programs we have lined up over the next couple of months. Next month we will have a speaker from Earth Justice who will discuss the restoration. Okay, thanks. The restoration of the Snake River salmon runs. And he's a representative of both his organization and an umbrella group called Save Our Salmon that's been working on that and many other salmon issues throughout a number of years now. And then in April we'll have two interesting presentations. The first will be from the Population Health Initiative at the University of Washington, and the second will be the director of the Downtown Seattle Association, whose topic is downtown coming back. Now, turning our attention to tonight's program, our speaker and his firm have designed a number of outstanding public buildings in Seattle. I'll mention a few so you're all familiar with, or most of you at least, some, if not all of them. Start with Benaroya Hall, and then McCaw Hall, the renovation for Seattle Opera, and the Foster School of Business on the University of Washington campus, and the new, still under construction, Ocean Pavilion for the Seattle Aquarium down on the waterfront. And that's just a small sample of the kind of work that they have done that's made a big contribution to the city and to the city beautiful, we like to call it. Their designs are sophisticated, they're modern, they're, I like to think, dignified, and they are designed with a view to the setting, so that they don't just produce a wonderful functional space, but they enhance their surroundings and therefore the entire city. So, Ms. Reddington, perhaps you could tell us how the Summit Building is going to do more of the same.
Thank you. Get this adjusted, and I hope this sounds okay for everybody so you can hear. Okay. And are we ready to push buttons? Okay. First, thanks for showing up. I really appreciate the chance to be here with you all. I think we were here showing preliminary thinking for this project several years ago, and it's really exciting that it's now finished and it's open, and we get a chance to show the result of what all that work has been. It's also really a special honor for me to be here talking about this building with George and Diane. And George, with his partners at the time, Jed Marquardt and John Nessholm, started LMN in 1979. And at the time, of course, they were starting a firm, and they would design anything anybody asked them to design so they could have some business. But in their hearts, they were really interested and dedicated to the idea of building a firm that would do public projects in the interest of the public good and engage communities, which we've been able to do both here and around North America. We've done similar projects to what you just heard about in other cities all over the country. So to come back here and talk about this project in our city with George and Diane is a real, it's an honor for me. Thank you. I will also say about this project that there were literally hundreds of design team members and thousands of construction team members and many, many people in the community, elected officials, community groups, city staff, and others who were part of this project. And one of the really exciting things about it is that we all were able, as a community, to make something happen by coming together, sharing a vision. Not everybody agreed on everything along the way, but we were still able to do something that's really extraordinary in its scope and its ambition. So I'm here speaking on behalf of thousands of people and the work that everybody has done. I'm going to just page through without reading every name, but just to remind you that there are so many other really important contributors to the project as we went through this. And one of the things that's been especially exciting about this project is that it has a very ambitious art program. The Convention Center has always had an ambitious art program and an art collection. Part of this project was to establish an art program, and it was funded from various sources. It was in the range of $8 to $9 million worth of artwork. We engaged approximately 25 different artists. There was a very specific ambition to reach out and engage artists from communities who haven't been traditionally a part of this art program. Many of them are young and emerging artists. More than half of them are women. And it's a really diverse, inclusive collection of artists, and the artwork throughout the project, all in public places where people can experience it from the street or from the public areas, is still emerging. It's not all installed yet. Some of it's there, some of it's in the process. But I think that the art program itself has been really an exciting part of the project. The other thing about this project is it's big, it's expansive in its expectations, and so we framed our approach like this. Like, this has got to be thought of as more, it's not just a building. In fact, we decided it's one of these things. And what one of those things means is it's a holistically integrated, equitable, economic, ecological, civic, urban organism. And every one of those words has an agenda. It has an impact on the way we think about designing and the expectation for what we'll accomplish by making this project with that kind of a philosophy. It's positioned, as you know, right in this really interesting place in our city, urban framework. It's kind of right on the edge between First Hill, Capitol Hill, and all of the neighborhoods right in the heart of downtown. Many of them are the fastest growing, most rapidly evolving neighborhoods in the city. And this project aspired to being a place that reconnects disconnected conditions in our city. It had historically been an open bus staging site, which was no longer needed when light rail went through the tunnel. Part of this building actually cantilevers over the freeway in order to connect the pedestrian experience on Pine Street. So it's knitting together a lot of different pieces of the city in the heart of the urban plan. Another part of this project is all of this pink stuff that is not on the same footprint as the building. The project funded about $93 million worth of community benefits, And most of them are off the footprint. Some of them are on-site open spaces and artwork, but a lot of it is all of these other things that are reaching out into the community and providing community benefits, street improvements, public artwork, affordable housing, the study for the possibilities of a freeway lid, and a number of other things that were part of the project. So I'm going to show you a series of photos. It's interesting to look at this photo, which was before we started the project. Not only do we now have a convention center there, but we have a whole bunch of towers right there that didn't exist. So it has been in the heart of a very rapidly place in our city. But if we start at the lowest level, at the bottom is a very big 150,000 square foot exhibition hall. So that's the blue shape that you see at the lowest level. And adjacent to that, also underground, is a loading dock. So there are all of these truck loading bays that are on the right-hand side, and then the left-hand side, the yellow, is the lobby space that connects to that truck loading dock. Sitting on top of that is the street grid of the city. So Olive Way that goes all the way through, and Terry Avenue that ends in Olive Way are built on top of the loading dock, which is sitting underground. Another interesting characteristic of this site is that in the foreground in that image is the intersection of Bourne Avenue and Pine Street. And at the far corner is the intersection of Howell and 9th Avenue. The site slopes 50 feet between those 2 points. So it's low at the far side, it's high up here at the corner of Bourne, which means that the pedestrian sidewalks and the intersection of the perimeter intersects the building floor plates at different floor levels in the building, which made the puzzle extra complicated but really interesting, so that you get a chance to engage the building in different ways around the perimeter. At street level, what you see here, everything in orange is retail or some kind of an active street front function, like a lobby to some of the other buildings, or the yellow or lobbies into the convention center spaces. One of the fundamental ambitions for this was also to create a very active, engaging, vibrant street front condition for pedestrian edges all around the blocks. And I'll show you more about that in a minute. On top of that, or at the same level, is a public market, which is that big yellow shape that you see. That's open to the public all the time, regardless of whether you have a ticket to go to a convention or not. The intention was to welcome people into that space. During design, we called it the mixing zone. The idea that visitors who may be from out of town coming to a convention, or people who live here and want to be part of the vibe of what's going on, go to the coffee shops or the restaurants, would all mix and share that experience. From that space, even if you're not going to a convention, you can look into the atrium and look down into the exhibit hall or up to the upper levels and actually see what's going on in the events. Above that are all of these other rooms. Let's see if I can, that went too fast, is that right? Okay, there we go. So above that, the next blue box you see is called the Flex Hall. That's a 100,000 square foot room with no columns. So it's a clear span room. It runs all the way from Bourne to 9th Avenue. It's 2 city blocks long. It has a big window at each end, so you look out at 9th Avenue toward the Camlin facade. You look out on the other side up into Capitol Hill. And there are also windows on the other sides looking across to the Paramount or down into the Denny Triangle neighborhood. The 2 purple levels are meeting rooms. And the red thing on the top is a 58,000 square foot ballroom. 58,000 square feet is the size of a football field, including the end zones. So you could put all of that right inside there. We're still trying to convince the convention center to let us have a flag football game in there where the design team and the contractors are going to play against each other just for fun. I think we could be faster than they would, but I don't know if we have the same critical mass. One of the other things that you'll find in these purple boxes are showing meeting spaces. They're not all enclosed rooms. And one of the things we know from designing convention centers and meeting spaces and gathering spaces for people around the country is that people were really tired of going into windowless boxes and sitting in and watching a presentation. They would rather have windows, they would rather feel like they're connected to the outside, to the city. And in fact, we designed a convention center in Vancouver on the waterfront a few years ago. It has a combination of sun-enclosed meeting rooms and sun spaces, lobbies that go around the edge with windows that look out into the city. And they found that they actually have a lot of their clients who would prefer to book their meetings in the lobby rather than in the meeting room so that they can look out the windows and be part of that experience. So in this case, we actually made every event space, including every meeting room, has access to daylight. And there are many meeting spaces that are simply glass enclosed spaces that are outside the enclosure, sitting adjacent to the lobby. And then if you pack it all together, that's the general building form of the project. In cross-section, you can see what happens when you stack all of that up. Looking at the lower cross-section, the lowest level there is the exhibit hall. You see those three skinny floor plates. There is a parking garage that's built into the heart of the building. You can't see it anywhere from the exterior. But what's built in the dimension of those three floor levels of the parking garage are big steel trusses that are creating the long span that goes over the long span exhibit hall below it. And then on top of that is that flex hall with no columns. And then on top of that are 2 stories of meeting rooms. Those also have really tall trusses that span across, which allows us to clear span the flex hall and create a really stiff floor in the ballroom. So that, because one of the challenges in a ballroom is when you have a dance party and everybody's moving at the same rhythm, it will vibrate the building. So we have to have a really, really stiff floor. And then the roof, of course, is up high in there with a long span over the ballroom. On the left side of that section, we'll come back to this in a minute, but you see how the building sticks out at the upper levels. One of the kind of strange things about this property, which is I think left over from when the I-5 corridor was created and they acquired property and they adjusted property lines, is the property lines for this site on the Pine Street site actually go all the way out to the curb. So we were able to build our building over the sidewalk and still be within our property. And so we did that, and we created that hill climb with the stepped floor that you can see from the facade, and you can be inside that space and you can look down toward the west, toward the market, toward Elliott Bay, and you're clear of all the other buildings because you're over the sidewalk, which makes an interesting space. And then the drawing above is all the same spaces, just looking at it from the other direction. One of the things you see there on the far left is a roof terrace, and I'll describe that more in a minute. It's an interesting space that is at the level where you're at the sort of cornice of the Camlin and the Paramount. So when you're on that terrace, you see all that terrific terracotta detailing that is at the upper part of the building that you don't really see so much from the sidewalk. Next to that, you can see another atrium. It goes from the top to the bottom. It's over 200 feet high. It brings daylight all the way through the building and connects all the different floor levels visually. This is a diagram. We did a lot of analysis of what does it mean to put a giant building like this in the city in a way that makes it feel like it's connecting and linking and contributing to the quality of the urban context. And so what you're seeing in this diagram is that analysis. We started with the historic plot plans for the city blocks in downtown Seattle. So there's a city block, there's an alley, there are a number of parcels dividing it, and you can see all those little red lines is the size of all the original parcels when the city was planned. And over time, buildings filled in. You see on the right side of that image, a series of relatively small buildings that each one occupy one of those plots, and that's the texture of First Hill and Capitol Hill, at least parts of it. And you can see where larger buildings have occupied bigger footprints. What we wanted to test was how could we be a little bit of both. We know we're never going to be as small as one of those, but we wanted to find a way to engage that texture so that when we manipulated the forms of the building, we were aligning it with those modules in the planning so that we're creating subparts to the building that are each one at the scale that relates to the surrounding buildings and the surrounding streets and is on the same texture as the historic grid. So that's what all of those colors are, and this is one of the diagrams of the analysis in order to look at it in that format. And then this is a street level plan. So this street level plan is actually more than one floor level in the building because of the sloping topography. But what you can see is the collection of things that line the edge of the building at the pedestrian edge. So orange, every place is retail. The hot pink color are all of those public art pieces, or some of them that I described a minute ago. The yellow are lobby spaces that are associated with events in the convention center. The mixing zone is that kind of tan, or it's called the market here, kind of that tan color. And then there are some outdoor spaces as well. We also analyzed the arrangement of similar functions on the streetscapes in the surrounding neighborhood, both in the Denny Triangle and the downtown core, as well as Capitol Hill, to make sure that we were at least as dense, and in most cases more dense, with active street front than the neighborhood was, so that we're not downgrading the quality of the pedestrian experience. We're actually amplifying the high quality aspects of the pedestrian experience. This building, when you have thousands and thousands of people, also requires a lot of emergency exiting. So woven into this and sort of broken into subparts that are relatively small and easy to absorb in this texture are 240 feet of exit doors that are distributed around the building just to provide the life safety requirements for how people would use it. So this is a diagram that kind of illustrates what I was talking about a minute ago. This is the kind of idea of urban collage, that even though we have a really big building, we're dividing it into subparts. And those subparts are collaged both with each other and the activities in the building and with the surrounding buildings and surrounding streets and surrounding open spaces, so that the ensemble of things we're designing and reacting to creates this integrated collection of relationships. And here's an example. So we're looking, we're right above Pine and 9th Avenue, looking down. The Paramount is in the lower right-hand part of that picture. The Camlin is on the lower left-hand side. What you see there is the roof garden. The width of that roof garden facing the Paramount is exactly the same width as the Paramount. And the edge of that roof garden on its north edge aligns with the north edge of the Camlin. And so what we have on that roof garden is a space that is framed by the Paramount on one side, the Camlin on one side. That special box, as we call it, the signature meeting room in the convention center, and then a view into the atrium of the convention center. So the convention center and the nearby buildings are forming an experience that's this kind of collage of what we control and what we're reacting to. And here's a view when you're on that roof terrace. The planting just went in about 2 days before we took this picture. None of it has grown out yet, so all these things that look like dirt will actually be plants when they grow. But there are also gathering spaces. So where all these people are standing will be a series of big, one of those kind of community picnic tables in long rows. There'll be smaller seating areas. But what you can see is the experience of being kind of up in the city. Right across the street is the top part of the Camlin, and you see all of that really interesting detailing, the Camlin sign. This is looking back toward that meeting room. There are 2 stories of meeting rooms in that space. Underneath that meeting room is a covered terrace space, so you can be outside in the rain under that space as part of the garden. And then you can be, of course, the Paramount is right across the street on the other side. So it's a really interesting and unusual way to be in the city and sort of associated with special detailing on the historic buildings around. The other thing that we worked really hard in thinking about the design is the context. And obviously the Camlin and the Paramount are really terrific buildings. But the whole downtown and all of Capitol Hill, it's a collection of buildings. And they're all, day and night, they're interesting in different ways. The light changes. The lights come on at night in the buildings, And one of the things we wanted to do in the design was to, when you're in the building, make it feel as though part of what your experience is the city surrounding you, that you're really connected to where you are. On one side, obviously the class side, and then you have the rooms and the events and the activities in the building, but that's the framing of the space. And we wanted to use that contextual setting very directly. I'm going to show you along the way here some images like this, which this is an illustration that we created during design to describe what the building was going to look like. And then I have also some photographs that were taken since it's been finished. We don't have any super professional photos yet, so these are just what we're able to collect, but it does give you a sense from approximately that same view. This is a photograph. What you can see is the reverse of what I just described, was that we also wanted the building to reveal its activities to the street, so that the treatment of the different facade elements has a lot of glass, a lot of ways to see in different ways into the building, a lot of ways to see the materials that are happening inside, so that it becomes an active part of the streetscape environment by presenting its activities to the street. And the material, if you see the sign that says Seattle Convention Center Summit, the wall there is kind of shimmery. That's a brushed stainless steel panel that is the only material that goes the entire length of the building. That's wrapping that flex hall space that I was describing. And that material goes in the building and out and around the other side. And it does have this really interesting shimmery effect where it picks up light and picks up the quality of light, the color of light, but it's not a mirror, it's just a sort of soft reflection. So it changes a lot and is really kind of a dynamic part of the facade expression. This is another one of our renderings that we created during design. This is a recent photograph. I'm going to describe one of the things in here a little bit more, but you can see it here is the underside, that's that faceted underside of that seating stair element is actually, that is a mirror. That's polished stainless steel. And the idea there is that because it's faceted, it's picking up reflections of all kinds of different angles anytime you look at it. When you're looking at it from an angle like this, you're actually seeing reflections of fragments of what's going on inside the building. When you're looking at it in different angles, you're seeing reflections of those, if you see those little roofs that are sitting below it, each one of those is a small retail space. There'll be a coffee shop in there. I think there's a beer place that's going to be in one of them. Each one of them has an artist associated with it, and the artist designed a panel that is on the wall that you can see from the street and wraps underneath it, which you can see from underneath when you're in the building, and it wraps on the roof, which you can see in that mirror when you're at different angles, or you can look down on it when you're in the building. So that mirror and the artwork becomes this composition that you experience in a lot of different ways. And then, of course, we recognize that the dynamic daylight here is stunning. And we wanted to allow this sort of experience and design of what we're creating inside the building to engage what it means to be in Seattle daylight. And a sense of material and craft and the quality of light were all part of how we thought about the interior design. So this diagram in the middle is showing where we have special wood elements in the interior design. And there are several of those that go through the building. In the mixing zone, we have a number of repurposed timbers that were harvested from the old buildings that were on the site before we started. And I'm going to march through and show you some of these other treatments in more detail. Starting with this is the hill climb space when you're inside it. So you're over the sidewalk, you're looking west in this view, and there's that tall, slender window. Because that window view is so important, both from the inside looking out and from the outside looking in, we treated that glass in a special way. So that glass, which is insulated glass, has two pieces, four surfaces. Every one of those surfaces has an anti-reflective coating like you would get on your glasses. So that you can be in here at night And unlike most windows, which at night you see the interior lights reflected in the window, and it's kind of hard to see out. In this case, you can see right out. The glass just kind of disappears. And likewise, during the day, you can be outside on Pine Street, and you can look right out into that window. And unlike most glass, you don't get a glaring reflection of the exterior. What you see overhead is a series of boards, or actually it's made out of a panel, a fir panel, and cut into what we call cones. But it's a series of boards shaped like this. We took the panels and we just cut them apart and turned them into that. And there are like 6,000 teeth of those cones. And we arranged them to sort of capture this filtered light effect. So during the day, the sunlight will come through it. At night, there's light that will shine through, and you get different layers of light through that wood. This is what it's like during the day. This is a photograph that when it was opened recently at the open house on, I guess it was last Friday or the Friday before that, or fairly recently anyhow. So you can see the effect of that window, the seating steps, the kind of dynamic of the different levels, and the sort of way it kind of pulls in the elements and becomes this composition of inside and outside. The day we had the open house there were opening events all week, but that one was by far the best, because that was where everybody in the city was invited to come in, walk around, explore the building, and there were thousands of people who showed up, and it was really fun to see all the different ways people found to experience the building. As it gets dark, it gets really dramatic in a different way, where the lights start to come on outside. You get this collection of reflections and transparency and different colors and spaces. A friend of mine was there with, I think his kids are about that big. They would go on these seat steps and jump, like 3 of them down and fly through the air. They sent me some pictures of that, which was pretty cool. So this, there are stairs there that are wood clad, and then there are seat steps that are the size of a bench, with the idea that people will just go there and hang out. You could actually seat about 350 people on that if every seat were occupied. And there will be custom cushions. They're still being manufactured. They're about this big, square. And they have a custom print, a photograph of a gigantic picture of a rhododendron blossom. So, and people will move those around and put them wherever they want. But the whole thing will look a little bit like a strange interior garden when those things are in place. This is a view of Horizon House. There are a lot of artists and other designers that were really inventive parts of the teams. One of them is this. There are these numbers on each level, and each number is designed with a different theme that's related to Seattle-specific themes. This one is about Seattle music, so designers in this case asked for people to contribute their old cassette tapes, and we filled it up with cassette tapes, and there's a little story about Seattle grunge music and the history of music in Seattle. And then this is a view looking back over that whole space from one of the upper balcony levels. There's also a mirror in this ceiling that you can see, so from here you have other ways to see different parts of the building. In many places, like this view, you get this terrific view of the Paramount sign. So that kind of shows up many times from different vantage points, different places in the building. This is that atrium space, taken one day when there was nobody there, but you can get a sense of the height. It's kind of difficult to capture the scale of these spaces in the photographs. But this is a little bit easier to understand because you can see how big people are in that space. But it's a really dramatic space because you can see all these different levels and kind of see what's going on in the building. This is one of our renderings, our illustrations, and here, if you look at the underside of that mirror, you can start to see the different artworks that are illustrated in that mirrored soffit. This is inside the building looking down on that artwork. So you can see there are 3 different artists. They're all completely different. The artwork is different. It was really interesting to invite them to each bring their own story and their personality to what they were designing. This is actually not a very clear photograph, but you can start to see the reflections of those pieces in that soffit. You can also see from this view into the ballroom. There's a really big window in the ballroom at the top level, and I'll talk about that design in a minute. This is closer up. So here you're underneath that mirror. You can see straight on at street level the side view of one of those artworks, and then you can see that one and two others reflected in that mirror. So we were also really interested in continuing to build on this sort of opportunity to capture dramatic qualities of light that you might experience in the forests. And we were also interested in other sort of timber industry references in our design. So these are log booms, and the way logs are moved through the water. These little creatures will go into the log booms and chew their way through, and eventually the logs will get so waterlogged that they don't float well enough and they have to be replaced. So when they pull them out and repurpose them, we use those to make these boards. And so this is, this is a rendering of the ballroom. This is a photograph of the ballroom. Those boards are really interesting because the part that floats underwater, or doesn't float, the part that sits underwater, is the place where the animals chew up the board. The part that's above water stays solid. So you can see they have two halves, and they have a lot of character about how they're made. And in this case, each of those boards is 8 feet long. They range from 14 inches to 18 inches wide, and we just, because the logs are all different sizes, we just said anything in that range is okay. And then we mounted them at different angles so they would catch the light in different ways. They're spaced wide enough so that a lift for servicing can reach up between the boards to get to all the equipment above. And we integrated that with a whole bunch of systems, in particular the lighting systems, and you can see two of them here. You see the black cylinder. There are a whole series of those cylinders that provide downlight, and they're all dimmable and programmable, so you can turn them up and down in various ways. But that allows the facility to illuminate activities that are happening at the floor level directly and provide general ambient light. You also see a series of lights that look like light sticks. Those are there to cast light horizontally onto the wood. So in this circumstance where we want the wood to become really rich, well-lit, warm sense of this wood ceiling, those would be turned on full strength. And then what you don't see in here is there are a whole bunch of robotically controlled theatrical lights above all of this wood, and some also mounted on the walls around the edge of the room. They're robotically controlled. They can move, they can aim their light in any direction. They're programmable, so they can change the color. They can dim them up or down, and they can create textured light or moving light, and they can do all kinds of things. So this room can transform into a lot of different activities. As a part of opening the building, they've been really eager to demonstrate all the things they can do with the lighting. You can see some of them here. So you can see pools of warm light, you can see blue light, you can see different things happening on the floor. And sometimes it's moving. But what it allows them to do in this room is transform it very easily to do almost anything in really dramatic ways. So they can have lots of events. They don't require people to come in and set up special stage lighting and special additional equipment. They can do that if they want to, but there's a lot you can do by simply using what's in the room. And again, the room it's very big. It's as big as a football field, but when you go in there, it doesn't feel that big at all. It's very deceiving the way that you experience the scale, which was something we wanted to feel. You run the risk in designing a room like this, where when somebody goes in there, it feels like you're lost. You're just in the middle of this gigantic space, and you have no sense of a connection to the experience of the room. So we do a lot of things when we design a room like this to deceive your perception of how big it is, so it feels not intimate exactly, but it feels smaller, it feels engaging, it feels like you're in a place that you can really appreciate and experience and not just a big, vast, sort of neutral space. And then going back down to the street level, the mixing zone or public market space, here shown in an illustration during design. What you're looking at in this view, you're looking south. Across the street would be the Paramount. There's an entrance at that corner near the Paramount. There's another entrance on Olive Way, so you can come in from either side. You can go all the way through this space. On the left-hand side of this view, those vertical wood members, those are the repurposed timbers from the buildings that were on the site before we did this building. Beyond those wood timbers is the atrium. So there's where you can look up and down and get the daylight from the sky and see what's going on in the convention, in the rest of the convention center. And then that's also where the registration hall is, and people who are coming to events go through there, register, and then go on to their various places in the building. On the right-hand side of this view will be a series of restaurants. There's one that's nearly completed there. It's the Ethan Stoll restaurant that will be in that space. There are other spaces for other restaurants and or tenants, and they're still working on filling all of those spaces. And there's a space in the middle that's open. It's a flexible space. That might be a space where the restaurants would spill out for certain times. There might be a space where they'd have a catered event. It's also intended to be a space where other kinds of things might happen. They might have an art show from a community group, or they might have yoga classes or other things, but it's an active part of the mixing zone and the shared community experience. And then overhead, what we designed here was what we call the biggest chandelier in the world. It's 180 feet long, and it's 30 feet wide, and it's 5 feet tall. And it's configured out of a series of sticks and a series of plywood panels. And this is a photograph of it after it's been installed. And we designed that to basically to create this kind of sculptural wood element that just anchors that whole space and that experience of coming in with a sort of signature piece that is memorable and has a lot of personality. When we worked with an artist, Kathy McClure, we designed those perforated panels that you see on the bottom. And each one of those is configured and based on the cell structure of a Pacific Northwest tree. And then there's a light above it shining through that perforated panel, creating that textured light on the floor. And the floor is wood also. So there's a lot of sort of wood stories and wood materials and a kind of immersive wood experience when you come into this entry space. And then there's glass at both ends, again looking out to the entrance. There are seating groupings that will be there that are open for people to come in and have coffee, study, hang out, whatever they're going to do in there. And I'm going to show you just a couple of other shots just moving around the building from the perimeter. This again at the Paramount corner. This is at the corner of Olive Way and 9th Avenue. The other entrance that I was describing is right there, so that mixing zone goes all the way through. One entrance is here. What you ought to see left of that are the brackets and those wood boxes that are hanging on the side of the building. Those are hanging gardens. They're plants that are in there. They're hard to see because they don't have any leaves right now, but they're a collection of ferns and small maple trees and other sort of local indigenous forest plantings. That collection of hanging gardens aligns with the dead end of Terry Avenue, which is a green street, which also has enhanced landscape on the street all the way down for several blocks. So that sort of terminates Terry Avenue. And then a view from across the freeway, and a view from the air. What's not built yet, you see the yellow crane just across the street from the convention center. That crane is associated with an office building that's in construction right now. Part of the project is to build an office building there, and an apartment building, which will be just to the left of it on the other block, both of them built above the loading dock at the convention center. So their structural core will come down in the middle of the loading dock. The ramp to get trucks down to the loading dock will spiral around that structural core, and then trucks will come back up and drive back out. So there's a whole integrated collection of commercial towers, truck service areas, lobbies, gardens, and a loading dock there on that side of Olive Way as part of the project as well. So that's a summary story about the project and the parts that are included. I think we should have something nicer on the screen. But I think we can answer questions in whatever format. I think there are microphone runners. Yeah.
Is this?
Well, sorry.
I have a question about the ballroom. It has beautiful carpeting, absolutely stunning. How are they going to dance?
Okay, I'm going to tell you the story of the ballroom carpet. I should have explained that, and then I'll tell you how they dance. It's a little. Do we have one? You can sort of see it here. So the carpet in the ballroom is a custom design, and we designed that by starting with a photograph of a forest floor, which has a whole bunch of different colors and leaves and swirling shapes. And we digitized that photograph. We enlarged it really, really big, and then started manipulating the colors and the composition so that it would create this big effect in the room. The repeat is 90 feet. So unlike most carpets where it will repeat every 18 inches or something like that, this is 90 feet by 90 feet. So when you're in the ballroom, you cannot see the repeat at all. It doesn't look like a pattern. It sort of looks like you're in a garden. It also disguises almost anything you could spill on it, which will be handy. If they're actually going to have an event where you're really dancing, they'll have a portable dance floor that they can put on top of it. I think she was first, if that matters.
So I'm wondering if this building connects to the previous convention center, and what the connection between them is, and is it going to make the old buildings redundant, or what happens with the previous convention centers?
In no particular order, the answers to your question, it does not physically connect. Part of the idea for this convention center, as well as the previous one, is that it's stacked, which has never been done before the way this one is, which means we could get all that square footage on a relatively small footprint, which means we could build it in the heart of the city. And that was intentional, because if we could build it that way, you could walk to your hotel, or there's like 7,000 hotel rooms within 2 or 3 blocks. You could walk to restaurants or shopping, and you wouldn't need as many shuttle buses and things traveling around. So the idea was to utilize downtown Seattle as part of the experience. And so if you need to go from one to the other, it's a block away and you would walk on the street. They, most of the time, will not need to do that. Most of their shows will occupy one building or the other building. And the basic intention is to schedule events so that while one building is active, the other one is either tearing down or setting up their show. And then when this is finished, that one will open, and vice versa, so that they can maintain a fairly consistent business in the convention center and all the associated spin-off businesses. Occasionally, a show will book both buildings if they need to. But the reason they chose to build this new building is that they didn't have the capacity in the old one to book all of the business that they had access to. They were turning away millions of dollars of business every year. So this gives them a chance to basically double the capacity bring in more business, and when they need to, they'll use both buildings for a show.
The old convention center is called Arch Convention Center now because there's an arch. This one is called Summit. Is it because you can see Summit Avenue from it?
I don't think that, they went through, as you can imagine, quite an analysis and a process to figure out how to give each building a memorable name that people, visitors, could remember and could associate with something that they would see at the building. Arch is obvious. The Summit, they thought, was, they were trying to capture a way to describe that hill climb, that sort of opportunity to be at the top. So that's the name they came up with as, for this one. I'm not sure they knew where Summit Avenue was when they did that.
Could you tell me, please, if you have kept the beautiful wood carving that was to the right as one went down the escalator, done by a lady who lived here, and I have forgotten her name.
Oh, and that's in the Arch building.
And I wonder if you still have it, what it is, and what her name is.
Doris Chase.
The artist, it sounds like it's Doris Chase. I'm sure the convention center still has it. They have a really big art collection and a way of curating that collection and moving it around. And we made places in this building to allow them to bring parts of that collection over, but I don't know the details of how they're organizing, how they do that, and when they do it. There's.
No, I got somebody over here.
Okay.
You're kind of
Well, you have overwhelmed us with pictures of light and color and reflections and urban landscapes seen from various parts of this building, which is so unlike any. I've been to lots of conferences in big hotels with the kind of dark internal rooms that you mentioned. What kind of precedents in contemporary architecture did you look at that gave you any inspiration, or was this entirely original?
We've designed a number of convention centers. The one that I mentioned, the most recent one, is in Vancouver, which is on the waterfront, and the entire perimeter is glass, with the idea there that you can look out to the bay or to the mountains or down back into downtown. This takes that idea 2 or 3 steps further, because what we were able to do here was not only have the glass on the perimeter, but actually put a lot of the meeting rooms in glass instead of inside looking through the lobby. And then by stacking it, we get a chance for you to have that view up high. And it's really dramatic when you're in this building and up high to have these big windows. I mean, the only other chance you get to see the city from that vantage point is if you're in a private building, if you're in an office building or a residential building, and you're in a relatively small room. To be in these big rooms with these big windows, it's really exciting experience that's kind of unique. So I think in that regard, this is something that we studied during design, but we wanted to create that kind of experience.
Hello, it's on, okay. You have a long list of public artists. Here I am.
Oh.
I presume that most of it hasn't yet been installed. Is that correct? Because when we toured the building, we saw the ones that you showed us, but we didn't see 50 other pieces of public art.
I think that's, yeah, I think about half of them have been installed. There are a number of other ones, especially on the north side, which are still in the works. Some of the Coast Salish native artwork is in, and some of it is not yet. There's a collection that happens at each entrance. The welcome figures are there, but some others are still in the works.
So will you have some kind of guide to where the public art is? Because we certainly didn't see.
Yeah, they, that's another, so I'm going to, yes, is the first answer. It's not there yet. they're working on a series, because I think every one of those artworks is really interesting. The story of the artist, the story of what they were thinking, what their art means to them, and they're developing plaques for each artwork so that when you see it, you get a chance to learn more about it. There are also a number of other interpretive plaques around the building that are not about the artwork, but they're about things you're seeing out the window, the history of the city, the Paramount, and that's on different railings at the level right on top of the Flex Hall. And then there are all these other things that are little panels about that big, and there are 25 of them that are on the steel framing next to the windows, and they're distributed all around, and those are other stories about this place. And we developed those with the idea that, one, they're not the normal stuff you would find on your iPhone, so you're not going to find one that explains the Space Needle or something like that. They're the kinds of stories that are connected to communities who historically are underrepresented in the way we talk about our city. And then we also collaborated with the zoo and the aquarium so that they're not all about humans. They're also about nature and animals and the fact that we live in an ecosystem that's shared with other organisms. They're all there. Some of them you have to find. What I'm hoping, but I don't know if this is going to happen, but I think the collection of all those stories, the artists, the interpretive panels, the other panels, should be put in a little book so that you can find all of it in one place, find where it is, and the collection of them will tell a really interesting story about our city and its history.
How did you design for the predicted level 9 earthquake?
We designed to comply with the building code requirements, which are really stringent around stability for a building in an earthquake. So that means a lot of things in this kind of a building in particular, but the way the structure is made, all of the things that are hanging have to be braced in certain ways so that they won't rattle around and fall. And the life safety systems, emergency exiting, all of that stuff, there are really strict building codes now that didn't exist years ago, and this complies with all of those, which introduces another complexity in just making sure we solve that properly when we design.
Did you, in terms of heating and cooling, did you think about what kind of heating and cooling do you have, and could you have done solar, or do you have solar as a potential?
We have some solar, and we have provision for more. And I think they intend to put it on, I don't know when, I hope as soon as possible. But there's provision for a significant amount of solar, and there's a certain amount of it already on the roof. Because there's a big roof there that's just the obvious place to want to put solar panels. We were pretty careful about the way we designed the mechanical systems, because these are tall spaces. And so in all of those tall spaces, the lobby spaces, there are radiant floor systems, so that the floors will either be warm or cool, depending on the needs of the condition of the air. But we're trying to condition the air at the low part of the room where the people are and not worry so much about all the volume up above. One of the things that gives us is that wood seat stair that goes up. It also has radiant coils in it, so when it's cold out, you can sit there and you'll have a nice warm seat.
Question I have is, knowing the topography of Seattle, what kind of issues did you find in the foundation? How did you handle the water flow that comes pouring off Capitol Hill, and how was that handled?
Digging underground for a giant footprint like this in the middle of the city where there have been generations of other things in the past does introduce complications. So they're actually, just a couple of examples. When they were excavating, and the corner at Pine and Boren comes right up to the edge of the express lanes of the freeway. And the building, we actually cantilever over it. But when they were excavating there, they found that when that freeway was built, it was it was built in a way that was draining the water off of that roadway into our property, which is not what the street is supposed to do. So there was a lot of figuring, that was a delay for a while in figuring out that sort of thing, dealing with the groundwater. There were also other parts of the site that had potentially historic artifacts from people who had lived there in the past. So they had, as they did excavation, they had people to monitor the earth that was being removed and check for anything. They found a few things, but nothing that was considered historically significant. But all of that was dealt with in various ways through the process. Obviously, the surface drainage of the streets and the things that are coming down the hill from Capitol Hill are all dealt with in the street and in the curbs. But the complication there is that if you go over there, you'll see that whole intersection of Pine and Boren sits above the freeway. And the corner of our building, including the sidewalk that goes with our building, is hung from our structure, joining up and sitting next to that bridge that's a separate structure over the freeway. So that whole intersection was really complicated. It was fun to figure it out, but it was fascinating to go look at it.
I have a question.
Down here.
He's gonna, okay.
Someone before, this is truly one of the most spectacular convention centers I've ever seen. I think it's really incredible. And I love how it interacts with the community. But the community is what worries me here. The Seattle you began with is not the Seattle that you now opened it up to. And I wonder how that wonderful entrance, opening every door on one street to the other street, who will go in there? Who will be spending most of their time there? And I wonder what that does to the very existence of this over time. It is a sad question. I'm sorry to bring it down because this is truly incredible.
Yeah, and obviously there's a lot to figure out there. I don't have an answer to that exactly, but I would say that this convention center, the Downtown Seattle Association, a number of other interests in the heart of the city, that same question applies to more than just the convention center, but to the whole downtown. They're all working together really carefully to think through that, and I know that there are a lot of things we hear about that are being considered, being worked on. But I think the question is really about the whole downtown, because the convention center is now a contributing part of the downtown. Hopefully it helps activate some things that might help generate answers to some of those things. The convention center can manage. They don't have to simply, they already have that condition in the Arch building. And so they have figured out their protocol for how they manage who comes in and how people use the building.
So I have a question because my apartment looks towards the south side of the convention center. So are they going to leave the lights on that bright at night all the time? Because it's kind of annoying.
There are lots of lights there. So it depends on what's going on, which parts of the building need light. I know they're still tuning some of the lighting. There is one set of lights that isn't finished yet at the ballroom level. For a while they were on and they were really bright and problematic. And so that we've been working to sort of adjust how they're going to be focused and so that they create the warm light in the wood, but they don't create the glare coming out of the window.
I don't mind. People are in the building using it, but you know, like at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, I think and I don't know if they figured that out yet. I don't think they have the intention of leaving lights on all night. But what I've heard them describe is the lights are there for events, but they turn them off at night. If they're on at 3 in the morning, then they're not figured out yet.
I have a question. It has to do with some of the materials. First of all, the windows. Wait for the mic. Wait for the mic. if you do get to go inside, the views from inside out to the city are incredible. That is fantastic. I mean, looking at the Camlin or looking down Pine, looking even towards Horizon House, which is not the best, and then looking towards Capitol Hill. Those are fabulous views. So that's very successful. I think that the scale of the building inside is pretty intimidating. It's, as one gentleman that I talked to said, it's cavernous. You know, but the materials, some of the materials that you've described are just great. I have a very practical question about, of all things, the material that is around the elevators. You know, that material, what is that? And is it meant to absorb sound?
It absorbs sound a little bit, yes, and it is a recycled aluminum. It's sometimes called aluminum foam, but it has that texture where you can see the little edges. There are different versions of it. That particular one is extra dense, so that it fills in the gaps somewhat, and so you can touch it and it feels okay. There are other versions where it's actually kind of sharp. But that one is, but they're all aluminum, so that's a recycled aluminum product.
We want to thank you for your presentation.